Back in the summer of 2010, I was sent to a place called Camp Ernst, a 2-week sleepaway camp that my parents signed me up for. Fortunately, I wasn't going alone. My best friend Keith was coming too, which made the whole idea a little less nerve-wracking. The camp looked exactly like the kind you'd see in an old-school summer camp horror flick, something straight out of Sleepaway Camp. It had that classic, eerie charm. 2 large, creaky wooden cabins sat on opposite ends of a small gravel path, one for the boys, one for the girls. At the center of the campgrounds stood a big lodge-style building that served as the main hub. Inside was the dining hall, the activity center, and a few other rooms we didn't get to explore much. Scattered further into the woods were smaller, shadowy buildings whose purpose we weren't quite sure of, and honestly, didn't want to find out. Keith and I always pushed our curfew. While the rest of the kids were long asleep, we stayed up playing games on our Nintendo DS systems under the thin sheets of our bunks. That night, it was well past 2 a.m., the kind of hour where everything feels unnaturally quiet and the woods outside the cabin turn pitch black. The only light in the room came from the soft blue glow of our DS screens. We were lying in our beds, whispering and clicking away at our games, when, suddenly, the door to the cabin creaked open. A jolt of panic rushed through both of us. Without even speaking, we instinctively slid our DSs under our pillows and snapped our eyes shut, pretending to be asleep. Footsteps entered the room, slow, deliberate. They moved across the wooden floor with a weight that made every board creak under pressure. Whoever it was passed Keith's bunk first, then made their way toward mine. Then, silence. The steps had stopped right next to my bed. I could feel something, the faintest, most delicate sensation, warm, shallow breaths brushing against the back of my neck. Whoever it was, they were standing over me, close enough for their breath to graze my skin. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My heart thudded so loud I was sure it could be heard echoing across the room. Then, just as slowly, the steps began again. They moved away from my bed, back toward the cabin door. A soft click. The door shut. I exhaled shakily and turned my head toward Keith. He was already staring back at me with wide, startled eyes. "That was scary," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath, especially since whoever that was breathing down my neck. Keith just nodded. We didn't speak again after that. Just slowly pulled our DSs back out from beneath our pillows and went back to playing, hoping the footsteps wouldn't return. That's when my phone buzzed. A new text message lit up the screen. "Why are you two still up?" The words made my stomach twist. At camp, only a few of us were allowed to keep our cell phones. As part of the rules, we'd all been given a list of the official phone numbers for the camp counselors, numbers we were supposed to call or text in case of an emergency. I scrolled through the contact list, comparing the number that had just texted me. It wasn't one of them. Not even close. The number didn't match any of the counselors I recognized, not even vaguely. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed back. "Who is this?" I waited. Nothing. No reply. I turned to Keith, who didn't have a phone of his own. I whispered the message to him, and as soon as I did, his expression changed. His face tightened, and he sat upright slightly in his bed. "That's not good," he muttered. "That's really not good." I nodded slowly. My gut told me it had to be a counselor, maybe one we hadn't met yet. Maybe someone just checking in after hearing noises or seeing lights. That's what we told ourselves, at least, trying to stay calm. So we went back to our DSs, this time turning the screen brightness down as low as it could go. The room was already dark, but now it felt suffocating, like the shadows were pressing in around us, heavy and watchful. Then we heard it, the soft, unmistakable creak of the back door to the cabin swinging open. We froze. No footsteps followed, just silence, cold, stretching silence. I could feel Keith looking at me again. We didn't say a word. We both just reacted, shoving our DSs back under our pillows like before and laying still, eyes wide open in the dark. And then, buzz. My phone vibrated in my hand. I glanced down, heart pounding against my ribs. Another message from the same unknown number. "It's Counselor Tony. Come outside to the back of the cabin. I have something to say to you." The blood drained from my face. I turned the screen to Keith so he could read it for himself. His lips pressed into a tight line, and I could see the fear flicker across his face like a shadow. "That sounds way too suspicious," he whispered. We sat there in the dark, not sure what to do, the weight of that eerie silence from the open back door still lingering. Then the realization hit us both at once, and it hit hard. Whoever had just opened that door might still be out there, might still be watching. And if there really was no Counselor Tony on staff, then who the hell just messaged me? I slowly slid out of bed, my feet touching the cold wooden floor with a soft creak. My hands were clammy, and my heart thumped hard in my chest. Keith whispered a sharp, "What are you doing?" But I didn't answer. I needed to see for myself. Cautiously, I crept toward the center of the room, just far enough to peek down the narrow hallway that led to the back door. Moonlight filtered in faintly through the screen, casting long, pale lines across the floor. I squinted into the darkness, straining to see. Nothing. No one in sight. But something didn't sit right. The air felt heavier near the back. Still, I took a few quiet steps down the hallway, each one slow and deliberate. Behind me, I could feel Keith's unease like a weight tugging at me. Then I saw it. Near the back door, the wooden wall dipped inward slightly, forming a shallow recess I'd never noticed before. It was just deep enough for someone to hide in. And someone. Tucked into that little caved-in section, barely illuminated by the moonlight, was a figure. At first, I couldn't make out much, just a shape, crouched and still. But as I stepped a little closer, I saw his face, and I froze. It wasn't a counselor. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was a man. An old, eerie-looking man, about my height, maybe a little shorter. His face was deeply lined, his eyes sunken and shadowed, staring right at me. He wasn't doing anything, just hiding, watching. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, but then instinct kicked in. I turned and bolted back down the hall, screaming help at the top of my lungs. My voice shattered the silence, waking every kid in the cabin. The sudden slam of the back door echoed behind me, loud and final. I didn't dare look back. Within seconds, one of the counselors burst in through the front door, eyes wide and scanning the chaos. Kids were sitting up, confused and scared. I pointed, breathless, toward the back of the cabin. There was a man. He was hiding, right by the back door. I could barely get the words out. The counselor's expression changed immediately. He motioned for the other staff, and soon multiple counselors were running across the campgrounds, flashlights in hand, shouting to one another as they scoured the perimeter. But the camp was massive, sprawling out in every direction, and surrounded by endless forest. There was no trace of him, no footprints, no sign of anyone, and he was gone. Later that night, after things settled down, I kept asking myself the same question over and over. How did he get my phone number? The only explanation I could come up with, the only thing that made even a sliver of sense, was that he had somehow gotten hold of the counselor's list. The list they'd given us at the start of camp, the one with all our numbers on it. But even if he had that, how did he know who I was? How did he know which bed I was in? How long had he been watching us? I still don't know. Every now and then, that night creeps back into my dreams. I'll see that hallway, that screen door, that shadowed figure tucked into the wall, just waiting for me to come closer. And I always wake up right before he moves. I was only 13 that summer, the first and last time I ever went to a teen summer camp. It was your standard setup: rustic cabins, lakeside activities, kids aged 13 to 16 awkwardly navigating teenage social dynamics. But there was something about this place, something off. Maybe it was the way the counselors talked about it in hushed tones when they thought no one was listening. Or maybe it was what I eventually found out, that the campgrounds had a bit of a history. An older woman who used to work there had died on the property. The details were never made public. No one wanted to talk about it. The staff just called it an unfortunate incident. Her name was Miss Graham, one of the old cafeteria workers. That's all anyone ever said, then quickly changed the subject. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story starts on one of those nights, the kind where your brain turns against you and makes it absolutely clear you're not getting any sleep tonight. I tossed and turned in my cot, trapped in that stiff, itchy blanket, as the rest of the campers slept soundly around me. I could hear the soft breathing of the others, even a few snores here and there. The room was filled with the usual nighttime sounds, quiet, rhythmic, peaceful. But my mind wouldn't shut off. The full moon outside was blindingly bright that night. It poured silver light through every window, casting pale rectangles across the floorboards and bathing the room in a soft, eerie glow. shadows stretched out long and thin, barely moving, frozen in place, like they were holding their breath. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, frustration bubbling up inside me. Eventually, I gave up. I sat up slowly, elbows on my knees, and rubbed my eyes with both hands. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, but my brain was wired. And then, something changed. When I opened my eyes again, I noticed that the moonlight coming through the window directly across from me was blocked. I blinked hard, confused. Someone was standing there, outside the cabin, silhouetted against the pale light. A head. It was unmistakably a person's head, just visible through the window. My breath caught in my throat. The face belonged to an older woman. Her features were hard to make out in the dark, but she wore a red cap pulled low over her forehead. She wasn't moving, just standing, staring. My stomach dropped. What the hell is this lady doing? I thought, trying to keep calm. Maybe it was one of the staff? Maybe someone checking on the cabins? But then the full weight of the moment hit me like a slow, sinking stone. She wasn't just standing outside the window. She was looking directly at me. Her eyes, they were locked onto mine, unblinking, cold, as if she knew I was awake the entire time, as if she'd been waiting for me to notice her. I panicked. I rolled onto my side and yanked the blanket over my face, heart pounding, skin crawling. I didn't know if I was trying to hide or just desperately pretending to be asleep. Maybe both. All I knew was I didn't want to see her anymore. I didn't want her to see me. I waited, counted to 60, slowly, painfully. Then, cautiously, I peeked back over the edge of the blanket. She was gone. The window was clear. The moonlight streamed in again, bright and cold and empty. I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and melted back into the mattress, trying to tell myself I was just overtired, just imagining things. But deep down, I knew what I saw, and something about that red cap still sends chills down my spine. But something still didn't feel right. Even though the woman was gone, vanished from the window across the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt heavier now, like the room had darkened somehow, even though the moonlight was still streaming in. Then I noticed it. The glow of the full moon that had once lit up every corner of the cabin now stopped short, just above my head. I slowly turned my gaze upward, toward the window directly above my cot. And there she was. No more than 3 feet away, just beyond the thin glass, the same older woman in the red cap was looking straight down at me. Her face was even clearer this time, pale, still. Her lips were thin, slightly parted. Her eyes, They didn't blink. They just bored down at me, locked onto mine again, like she could see through the blankets, through the walls, right into me. I couldn't breathe. Terror gripped me like a vice, and I did the only thing I could manage. I yanked the covers over my head and curled up as tight as I could, cowering beneath the thin fabric like it was armor. My heart was racing, hammering so loudly I was sure it would wake the others. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen, drenched in fear. Minutes? Hours? I must have passed out eventually, because the next thing I remember was daylight. And the woman was gone. Still shaken, I got up and went straight to one of the adults who ran the camp. I couldn't hold it in. I told him everything. The window, the red cap, the way she stared at me like she knew me. I expected him to brush it off, laugh maybe, tell me I was dreaming. But he didn't. He stiffened slightly. His face paled a bit. Then he glanced at the two women sitting in the office with him, and they both looked back at him, visibly disturbed. One of the women leaned forward and said in a hushed, shaky voice, "That's so creepy. That sounds exactly like Miss Graham." The name hit me like a punch to the chest. My heart skipped a beat. None of them said anything else for a moment. The room went silent, except for the soft hum of a fan in the corner. To this day, I still don't know what I really saw that night. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe my tired brain conjured up a face from the old rumors I'd overheard. Maybe it was just some prank, a late-night hallucination, something explainable. But maybe, just maybe, it was Miss Graham, still watching the camp, still standing outside that window. I never forget the summer I spent at a sleepaway camp in Pennsylvania. I was just a little kid, shy, awkward, and not great at meeting new people. Honestly, the first day felt like a nightmare. Orientation was packed with kids who seemed way more confident than I was, already laughing, shouting, forming groups. I remember standing there, clutching my duffel bag, wishing more than anything I could be home, parked in front of the TV, playing Super Nintendo instead. Most of the other kids blended in quickly. It didn't take long before they were talking like they'd known each other for years. I kept thinking, great, I'm going to be the odd one out the whole time. But, to my surprise, I got lucky. One of the more outgoing kids struck up a conversation with me that first afternoon. I wish I could remember his name now, but it's long gone from my memory, so I'll just call him Mike.
Mike was a short, blonde kid, full of energy, and always wore this beat-up Yankees hat like it was glued to his head. At the time, I thought he was the coolest kid I'd ever met. He had that kind of confidence that made you want to follow him around and see what kind of trouble he could get into next. Looking back now, I wouldn't be surprised if he turned into one of those kids who got suspended every other week in high school. Charming, wild, and just a little reckless. That first day, after orientation, we got a tour of the campgrounds. The place was huge. Trails cutting through thick woods, wide open fields, a lake shimmering under the sun. We passed the usual summer camp buildings, the mess hall, the main cabins, the arts and crafts lodge. Everything smelled like pine needles and sunscreen. But then, tucked away near the edge of the property, we noticed something strange. A small building, set apart from the others, weathered, crooked, and clearly neglected. The wooden siding was gray and peeling. The windows were dusty and covered in streaks. The door hung just slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. It looked like it had been untouched for a long time.
Mike and I immediately noticed it. We exchanged a look, that unspoken agreement every curious kid shares when something feels out of place. We raised our hands and asked one of the counselors about it. The guy looked over, squinting at the structure like he hadn't even noticed it was there. "No clue," he said casually. "It's my first week working here. All I know is that no one's used that place in years." He didn't offer any more explanation, just turned and kept walking. But Mike and I didn't forget it. That lonely, abandoned building with the open door stayed in the back of our minds. Something about it felt wrong, like it was waiting for someone to come inside. It was the last night of camp. Everyone was in their bunks, winding down, settling in for one final night before we'd all go home the next morning. The low murmur of voices faded gradually into silence, one by one, until all that remained was the occasional creak of the floorboards or the faint rustle of a sleeping bag. That's when Mike leaned over and whispered into my ear. He wanted to sneak out. So he wanted to head over to that abandoned bunk we'd seen on the first day. The one that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Just for fun, he said. See what's inside. Everything in me screamed no, but instead, I nodded. I don't even know why I agreed. Maybe it was because I wanted him to keep thinking I was cool? Or maybe, at that age, I still thought kids like Mike were the kind of people worth impressing. So, we waited. We laid in our bunks, perfectly still, until the last of the lights in the counselors' cabins finally blinked off. It wasn't long, since it was already late, and once the coast was clear, we slipped quietly out of bed, tiptoed past rows of sleeping campers, and crept outside. The night air was thick and damp, the kind of cool that clings to your skin. We stayed low as we moved between buildings, sticking to the shadows. I could barely hear anything over the pounding of my heart. We crept down the paved path that wound past the counselors' quarters, the gravel crunching faintly beneath our shoes. I wasn't cut out for this kind of sneaking around, not then. Every step felt like it was going to get us caught, or worse. Mike, on the other hand, was completely in his element. He walked with confidence, like we were on some kind of secret mission. Eventually, we made it. We stopped just outside the abandoned bunk, the same one with the slanted door and peeling paint. Up close, it looked even more run down. The boards covering the front door were warped and cracked, but still firmly nailed shut. That was part of why it had grabbed our attention in the first place. It wasn't just locked, it was sealed. But of course, Mike already had a plan. "There," he said, pointing. One of the side windows, its glass completely shattered, jagged remnants still clinging to the frame, had been busted open long ago. The gaping hole looked just wide enough for us to climb through. Mike hoisted himself up first, wriggling his way inside. I followed a moment later, careful not to cut myself on the broken glass. The second I dropped to the floor on the other side, a chill crept over me. The air in there was different, heavier, cold. We were inside. These buildings weren't small shacks either, not like some tool shed or storage hut. Each bunk had room for at least 10 campers, maybe more. Rows of beds stretched into the dark like silent sentinels. We stood there in the middle of that long-forgotten cabin, surrounded by shadows. There were no lights, not even from outside, just blackness. A damp, musty smell hung in the air, something between mildew and old wood. We stretched our arms out in front of us, feeling our way around blindly. I walked straight into a bunk bed, twice. The second time it rattled loudly, nearly toppling me backward. Somewhere to my right, I heard Mike grunt and curse under his breath as he bumped into one too. The whole place felt like it hadn't been touched in years, like it was frozen in time. Cold metal bed frames, dust-coated floorboards, echoes of our own breathing. I was starting to regret coming, but something about the silence in that place, it didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. I paused mid-step. I'd just slammed my shin into another bunk bed and was about to mutter something to Mike when I heard it. A rhythmic squeaking coming from somewhere nearby. A faint, high-pitched creak over and over again, like metal coils compressing under weight, like someone bouncing on a mattress. "Mike," I whispered sharply, "stop messing around." I assumed, naturally, that he'd hopped onto one of the old bunk beds and was jumping up and down like a maniac, trying to scare me. It would have been just like him. I was already annoyed and spooked enough in the dark without him playing games. But then, from the opposite side of the room, I heard his voice. "That's not me," he said. "I thought that was you." My whole body went cold. We had no flashlights, no phone lights, nothing. The abandoned bunk was shrouded in total darkness. Not even moonlight had made it in through the boarded windows. We were two kids standing alone in a forgotten cabin, and somewhere, in that blackness, someone, or something, was bouncing up and down on a creaky, rusted mattress. Right then, all logic left us. We panicked. Our feet scrambled against the floorboards as we ran, blindly feeling our way back to the window we'd come through. The narrow, jagged hole suddenly seemed much smaller than before. Mike got there first. I could hear him struggling to squeeze through the frame, breathing hard. I kept glancing behind me, even though I couldn't see a thing, just pitch black and the sound of that mattress still squeaking in the dark. Then, the bouncing stopped. Silence. And then, a heavy thump, like someone jumping off the bed, landing hard. I didn't wait another second.